Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. You are, of course, locked to SM Advanced Forum with myself, Don Robinson, and my usual gang of illustrious hosts. Are you out there? Let's who's first? Is Tim out there? You are, of course, locked to SM Advanced Forum.
I am, and I'm hearing a lovely long delay of an echo. Are you hearing that, Don?
I think I've killed that. Is it gone?
Okay. It is.
Streaming chat. There's always you know.
Is that the long tail part of it? Is that what you were doing?
The incompetent webcast part of it. I'm now going to try and turn off the little images at the bottom of the screen because I'm sure you don't want to watch us grinning insanely.
Actually, the very first one, I don't know if you remember, in the very first one, I actually had something to eat. I think I was eating a salad in the middle of that one. That's why we realized we had to turn them off. So I'm doing well, Dom. Yesterday was my birthday, and actually I had a present for you, but I'm not sure if it's been delivered yet. I'll have to check with your lovely better half and see if it's actually arrived.
Oh, right.
It may come in sometime during the show today. We'll see.
Okay, that sounds curious. What, it was a present for me or from me?
For you.
Oh, right. Okay, cool.
It's my birthday, and I'm allowed to give presents away.
She's found the Amazon card again. Damn it. Excellent. Have you been up to any events in the last month then, Tim?
No, I came back from Streaming Forum and Mobile World Congress, and have been pretty much sitting tight. We did do a streamingmedia.com session on what to see at NAB, and we'll talk about that down toward the end of the show.
Cool. Excellent. All right, well, Tim, you take it over for a second. I've just got to press a few buttons that I haven't pressed and do the usual.
Absolutely. So actually, Mark, we'll go ahead and hand off to you. And I'll just mention before Mark talks that Eric may be joining later as well, but that's not the gift, Dom. So.
Eric's always a gift.
Eric is a gift to us all.
He is.
So things have been good here. I've been heads down on a project for iStream Planet, actually. We've been launching a new sports platform in New Zealand called Spark Sport, which is now successfully launched, and we've been getting some good press on it. So yeah, that's eaten up the last month of my life, and now I'm starting to kind of dig out from that. So things are good.
Mio dragged you back to the mothership?
He did. I actually have like an ID card and an email address and everything. It's crazy. Yeah,
wow.
I'm getting the band back together.
The funny thing, just a funny story on that. I went to visit him at the office there in Vegas, probably around Infocom last year, and for whatever reason, I decided I always take public transportation, so I got on the RTC bus, and for some reason, the road that it said his office was on actually is now a large subdivision, which is sort of typical in Vegas. Mm-hmm. I ended up having to scale a wall after the bus dropped me off. Scale a wall, walk through a complete wasteland of torn up macadam or blacktop, and finally find the warehouse section. But because I came at it from the backside, it took me almost like an extra 30 minutes to actually get there to the office.
Yeah, that part of town, we built that on the frontier, and it's still the frontier a decade later. It's pretty crazy. But
yeah, I felt like I was entering the desert when I had to walk across that wasteland. But apparently what they'd done is they'd cut the road in half. They bifurcated it, and so where the bus dropped me, Google Maps hadn't been updated yet to understand that there was no road there anymore.
Always a fun time. Yeah, all of the money has gone towards the beautiful Seattle office, where the majority of the iStream Planet folks work now. So you should visit that office soon.
I will definitely do that.
That's good stuff.
All right, and on to our guest, just for brief introductions. Ladies first, Olga, tell us a little bit about your background in the industry, and then I'll tell how we met, because it's about a year ago.
Yeah, it was definitely about a year ago. My name is Olga Kornienko. I am one of the founders and the COO of EasyDRM. We are the original DRM as a service provider, doing business in some way, shape, or form since 2001. And it is a pleasure to meet everybody.
Yeah, likewise. And I'll say the way we met is, of course, my birthday was April 3rd. Joel Unico, who's the publisher, is April 6th. And it just happened to be that we decided to do a combined birthday party in Vegas, a brief one, and Olga and one of her business partners showed up there at that as well. I think that was the SLS. Joel had rented a cabana for the afternoon. So, all right, and on to our next guest. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Simon Ball. I'm a Senior VP at West Digital Media Solutions. Been in the webcasting space for a long time now. Known Dom for just about that entire time as well. Happy to be here.
Live, yeah.
Happy to be here.
Cool. So yes, say fair disclosure, Simon's been keeping our company alive for many years. You've got a very big workflow, lots and lots of streams on your platform, haven't you, Simon?
Indeed, yeah. I think we were the first people to take streaming to the cloud elastically back in 2011.
Yeah, old school.
Old school.
Definitely. Good. Right, Tim, take us on to some topics. Let's see what the guys have got to talk about. And I'm going to press my magic button. Let me just see if that works. Oh, it works, but no sound. Amazing. I'll do it.
Aww.
There we go.
All right, somebody drop a beat so that Dom can have. All right, actually, Olga, let's start with you. One of the topics when you mentioned DRM that of course comes up is piracy, and it seems to be there's a trend in the industry to say piracy is not that big of a deal these days. What's your take on it? Is piracy dead?
I would argue and say no, it's not dead. And you read a lot of articles about it and you see all this information. And yes, you can do your best to fight piracy, but at the end of the day, we obviously wouldn't, my company wouldn't exist if piracy was dead. And I think a big chunk of it has to do with basic supply and demand. As long as people are looking for content they cannot get their hands on, somebody's going to try to provide it. And in my opinion, it partially has to do with the abundant number of subscription and the market segregating to the extent that it is, where you can only see some content in some places from some providers, but if you travel, you don't get to see that content anymore. And the more the market segregates, the more people are going to try to turn to companies that do offer illegal downloads. And I've actually, out of curiosity, looked one up. And I'm like, wow, this is easy. And I don't have to worry about this. And I don't have to install 12 different suspicious pieces of software in order to download one item. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And as much as we as the industry try to fight it, I think our job is to make things as easy as we can for people to see content, to get their hands on content. But as long as there's any sort of geographical or whatever other reasons that prevent us from getting our hands on the content, it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned the geographic thing, because I wrote an article a couple of years ago where I was traveling abroad and I wanted my Netflix subscription. And of course, it wouldn't allow me to do that. Amazon Prime, the same thing. Although in recent years, I've noticed that Prime now, if I'm traveling to Europe or India, they have a small group of content, primarily Amazon originals, that I can watch wherever I am. There was a study a couple years ago that basically said if you can't get your hands on content legitimately within the first 36 hours, that you'll go to, illegal download sites. Do you think that's still consistent today, or do you think that people are more tolerant or willing to wait for a couple more days to get legal content?
I actually think it's getting worse. In my opinion, I think we're a society where if we don't get something right away, if the site doesn't load in 0.4 seconds, we go, forget it, next site. I think it's the same way. I know when I travel, it's hard because I'm like, I don't understand why, as a person who lives in the United States, I can't see the content I would see if I was in the United States. And I don't know, maybe companies need to come out with a concept of home market, where based on my credit card address, I can see the content that I'm allowed to see. I do understand the logic of not showing certain content in certain geographical areas, but why can't I, as a U.S. person, see the stuff I need to see?
Oh, Tim's just out the picture there. Sorry, Simon, I interrupted.
That's okay. I mean, piracy takes different forms. I remember when I first moved to the US, I had a desire to keep connecting to the BBC iPlayer because I was following certain things. The way I solved that was subscribing to a UK ISP for $5 a month. And is that piracy, or is that just being
in the
innovative? I think the BBC should have made it available to me in the first place. But sports is the big one. If you're a sports viewer, it's and there was an article about the Premiership guys that been arrested. It's prohibitively expensive in lots of cases for people to want to to view sports, and I think that is, you're still seeing a lot of that. I pay $24 a month just so I can see the Premiership. I'm sure if there was a quality alternative, I would go with it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've got two different articles here talking about. Let me just push those to the stream so that everyone can look at them. Can you see them now? Let's see. Right, so two different articles off the newsfeed this month. There was one talking about a group who's actually been jailed for defrauding the Premier League. So three folks have had, one of them's had 7 years and 4 months imprisonment, and so on. So pretty heavy duty sort of what's the word, sentences for piracy. I think that they sound like they're being made an example of rather than anything else. It's 7 years, given that your average rapist in England gets about 2 months. It's probably quite heavy-handed in social terms.
I find it interesting if you read the article that those sentences were so high because of the lengths to which they went to enable the technology. They developed their own proprietary technology and their own hardware and sold the hardware online, and it wasn't a mom and pop organization. It was very, very well funded and very well executed by all accounts. So I think it's interesting that they've made an example of them because of the sophistication of the operation.
They certainly were pretty determined, I think, and live obviously takes that little bit of extra effort. But it's interesting. Compare that with this article, which is actually commenting much more on piracy of movies and so on, and films. There was a set of interesting stats up the top. Nearly 190 billion visits were made to illegal piracy sites, and almost half of them were for television shows, which is kind of interesting. Olga, question for you. Although you're probably at the other end of the workflow in terms of trying to establish the system that prevents the piracy in the first place, I wonder what is the dominant mode of piracy? Is it still screen capture?
Honestly, at this point, I don't know. We actually had a funny situation where for a Dash IF presentation, we were doing we needed a screen capture of a video, and we spent about 5 minutes going, why is this not working? And then somebody said, oh wait, DRM is not letting it do that, because instead of a big buck bunny, we were getting a black little square. And then it all dawned on us, then yes, DRM is actually doing its job. So unfortunately, I don't quite know exactly which way they're going for it. But I also, as I said, with piracy, I think that when people buy pirated videos, they're perfectly fine with screen capture. So, but I don't know how they're getting there.
Yeah, I think people give up on quality when they're getting stuff that would otherwise be expensive for free. So I should imagine screen camming is probably the most logical way. I think most of and this is anecdotal, but from what I understand, most live sports piracy is just rebroadcasting from traditional cable set-top boxes. I think that's the dominant form. I don't know. Maybe is it something that you've had challenges with, Simon, in the corporate environment?
Not so much. We in my sort of corporate space, we're not monetizing content for ourselves. We're providing the service for corporations to supply content to their target audiences, and typically they want those target audiences to view the content. So there's not such a big a big drive around piracy, more around security, right? It's protecting the content from being viewed, not being copied or being misused or information leaking out. There's a lot of focus around that in the corporate industry for sure. Hence the
I'd be interested to know, as opposed to like corporate versus entertainment, maybe since we have Olga here, what's the split in terms of customers who are using DRM to protect live events versus live linear? Is there any market for DRM in live events these days, or is it all linear content that's being protected?
No, there's a lot of live events, mostly sports. We do. We don't see concerts so much, but we do see a lot of sports, and we do see people using DRM for internal corporate broadcast announcements. Anything that a company makes an internal announcement that is recorded that does get DRM protected, so that it doesn't leak out outside of the corporate environment.
Gotcha. Interesting.
We're getting some comments in on the chat room. So Andrew P has what's he commenting? The problem is you do not wait for a few days. It's impossible to get content, and it's the same challenge with Netflix US versus Canada. So yeah, I think going back to rights windowing, jumping around a little bit here, but I think going back to rights windowing, I think it's we are going to get to a bit of a critical mass over the next few years as we start to see such a dominant audience moving on to the OTT online streaming space. And I think we're going to start seeing people sort of experimenting a little bit more with new rights windows. I'm still baffled why they don't just go for global release everywhere, because I think the whole TV everywhere model of I want to watch content on whatever device or in whatever location I want to watch it. Really, if you want to capture an audience, capture them when they're interested to see it rather than when you think it suits your business model, is my opinion. But Simon, you're smiling, Riley, there.
No, I was just smiling at the comment of make it. What's the difference if you're 10 miles north of a location in terms of viewing content? I agree. Make it available to everybody. I don't understand why you would do rights window releases.
I think it's something that's going to be worked out. Sorry,
do we know, is anyone doing that these days? Do any SVOD services have the concept of a home market or a users area or anything like that, or is it all geo-restricted based on current location?
I think it's all geo-restricted based on your current location.
That seems odd to me that no one's broached that. I wonder if it's what's the word I'm looking for? A quagmire with regard to the content owners, or if it's just the state of the industry and people aren't willing to kind of go outside the norm. What are your thoughts on that?
My theory is that it's the rights holders, and I think that is a bigger topic that needs to be addressed more on the legal side, if I had to make a guess, because those are the people who, at the end of the day, dictate how we're supposed to watch everything.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it making sense for sports content for sure, with regard to blackouts and proximity to an actual physical sports arena and that sort of thing. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for original entertainment content. But it seems to have that concept seems to have leaked over into that space as well. Do you know?
Absolutely, and as I said, I don't understand why people would need to do that. I mean, to the weird point where you can download something on Netflix before you travel, and once you get to your new destination, if you can't see it, as long as you're connected to the internet, you can't see it. The moment you unhook from the internet, it goes, oh wait, now you can view it.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But it's to do with broadcasters in the first place, isn't it? Where there is different timed releases of certain content because of scheduling. They don't want it to be available outside of the network prior to that on any of the sort of what was considered the new media streaming forums.
Actually begs a question for me. Any of you guys following the latest Star Trek series?
No.
Basically, they're coming out on Fridays over here in the UK, but it's a bit indeterminate what time on Friday they come out. And I was just wondering if they just do a global release at say 9 a.m. Pacific time, or whether they're actually staggering it and say doing it. Because I don't know exactly what time. I usually watch it on Saturday because I get confused by it. But I just wondered if any of you guys were watching it, if they're releasing it at say 9 p.m. Everywhere using a DRM to unlock it as it goes around the world, or whether they're just uploading it onto the server and making it globally available. I haven't quite worked that one out yet. It's going to get interesting anyway. So just to move on a topic, there's also, and it sort of segues into the EU copyright directives that are coming out at the moment. I mean, given piracies, the news is that piracy is proving difficult to police. I find it interesting that there's a whole new swathe of regulation coming out over here in the EU to stop piracy. Okay, it's probably more broadly relating to forwarding memes and so on and so forth. But it does seem that adding more regulations, I'm not sure is going to solve any problem. I think it's just going to create an overhead for police and regulators to try to address it. I think this is, unless you can come up with a technical solution to this, to counter piracy rather than to piracy prevention like DRM. Once the piracy is underway, I think it's you've got to come up with a technical solution. Throwing regulation at it is probably a bit of a pointless exercise. Any thoughts on that, guys? Oh, we've got Olga's muted, I think. I can see the lips moving.
Sorry. Well, I don't know how they would. I was reading a lot about it, and I don't know how you can overall prevent somebody from posting something and then hold the person who is, hosting the infrastructure accountable for it without having so many people involved. It's just, I feel like it's going to create more problems than it solves, and I feel like we're going to lose a lot of content just because somewhere something is, referring to an article and all of a sudden it's all blocked.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't think it's going to make much sense.
I think I've been surprised. We developed a forensic watermarking system probably 2013 or something. We touted it around the music, the movie studios and so on. And it's interesting because obviously if you only release through a streaming format, actually you're probably more protected than if you ever put it out on a free-to-air public cable broadcast or something. That's what most of the content's originated on the traditional broadcast methods. But it's interesting because with forensic watermarking, you can't prevent the piracy, but you can deterministically identify the pirate, which should be a pretty good deterrent. And I'm surprised that we've seen a number of other vendors come into the market with similar technologies, and I've been quite surprised that they haven't been more rapidly adopted. It wasn't for us at the time to go and sort of try to build that market. We sort of came up with the technology and thought people will be quite interested in it. But it was probably too early on. But now OTT cord cutting are big stories. I'm very surprised that there hasn't been more traction from one of the forensic watermark players. At the end of the day, that allows you to deterministically identify who is rebroadcasting, even if they're screen capturing. And I think that there probably will be technological solutions. But I also think that there's a sense of paralysis in terms of who owns that problem, whether it's the studios should be taking that on, or whether it's the ISPs should be taking on, or whether it's other rights holders who are perhaps licensing the content that then subsequently gets pirated. I think there's a real sense of somebody else go to all the work to catch the pirates, and then once you've done it, then we'll have our missed royalties, please, or whatever. I think it's a decision paralysis.
Well, we see people using forensic watermarking in conjunction with DRM. However, it seems to, and I don't know, I personally haven't seen too much of an uptake for it. And I do agree with you. I don't know how or why, but I also think that at the end of the day, if you put a camera in front of a TV and record an episode of, I don't know, the universe, and then throw it up on YouTube, forensic watermarking or anything else won't really help that much, especially if it's coming from television. So who at the end of the day owns that? Is that YouTube's fault, or is that the person who's actually throwing it up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously if the content is originated online, you can fairly determine, you can set a forensic watermark that knows who the subscriber is. And if you just cut away the traditional broadcast environment, then at the end of the day, that content you'll be able to forever track that rebroadcaster. Oh, Jim McNeil's asking, Olga, any thoughts on ACR, automatic content recognition?
In relationship to DRM or in relationship to?
I think in the context of counter piracy.
I mean, I personally haven't seen it, and any technology that's out there has to be tested and make sure that it works correctly and it works what it's supposed to do. And I don't know maybe it's a good thing to have regulations force us to do something like this, but I don't know. I would want to see it work before we can say it has to work.
Cool. I think we're getting Tim back in, although I think his laptop has recharged, but not his camera so far. So we have a muted blue screen from Tim. He'll probably re-emerge in a second. Let's pick the next topic off the stack because we're coming up for the half-hour mark. So Simon, you commented that you were quite excited to see the BBC Ultra HD trial coming up. What were your thoughts on that?
I'm just a bit of a BBC fan when it comes to their streaming technology. And the way they approached things like the Olympics. I thought their display of the Olympics was brilliant. Interesting to know how many people in the UK can actually view a Ultra HD stream as a stream. Yeah. I would have thought it's still limited. So it seems like it's a bit of a sort of, we can do this, but we know you can't watch it exercise.
Yeah, call me a cynic. Call me a cynic, but I think they should be spending the license fee on and other things, to be honest, because I don't know. Yeah, UHDs, at least they're not spending too much on 8K and 16K and chasing silly bit rates that are irrelevant. But at least there is something of value. But they talked about, here we go. I've got the stream here. They talked about the article. They talked about how they had a huge amount of people watching some content which they've previously put on up online, and people who haven't got 4K TVs were still selecting the 4K HDR content. So I just wonder how many stats are being produced by these type of explorations just for the sake of getting more budget in next year's budget, actually bringing benefit to the end users.
Well, rest assured, there'll be corporations out there asking for it if they see it on on the mainstream channels. I'll be fielding those questions over the next few months. We want Ultra HD on our network. Yeah.
I mean, Mark, you're out there with iStream Planet doing some quite high-end live festival and live concert events and so on and so forth. Are you getting out even into 4K, or are you going above 4K into 8K and where's the tier for your?
There's occasional stuff. It's not. I mean, there aren't as many barriers to entry for production as there used to be. I mean, if I'm hiring a production truck, what you would call an OB truck over there, these days, 9 times out of 10, it's probably 4K enabled anyway.
So, but do you think this is? I mean, I get it for production reasons. I get shooting in 4K for cropping into images to take quarter of the screen down to a 1080p and so on, but I just don't get it for a domestic use case at all. And I kind of get HDR, but I just don't get 4K market in the domestic context at all. Call me a cynic.
Yeah, there's just not much of a value add there. But yeah, to your point, I absolutely understand HDR more than I understand 4K. That said, there's more barriers to producing HDR content than there are to producing 4K content these days, just because of how the production equipment market has gone. So
I think we got Tim back in.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. For some reason, the laptop won't recharge. I have this fancy USB-C adapter that I bought in Amsterdam, and I've never used it before, and I thought that it was going to charge, but maybe there's just something that I'm doing wrong.
There's your problem. European black market peripherals, man.
Yeah, and it's a black box, so I guess that's about the case. I wanted to just add something to what Simon was saying on and Dom, what you were saying about the budgets. That may not be that far off in terms of if we have to push everything to 4K, if we have to do a 4K production workflow and broadcast workflow, that means that, you know, we need to spend on brand new equipment, brand new kit. What concerns me about the timing now, to be perfectly honest, is with HBB 2.0 and ATSC 3.0 coming on, you know, if we're doing IP broadcast of 1080p, that's one thing. If we're doing IP broadcast of 4K, especially in a multicast environment, I think that's going to add quite a bit more to sort of the difficulty. So the whole idea of HD and UHD on terrestrial broadcasts, when you add to the mix the need to move to IP broadcast here in the next couple of years, certainly seems like it's going to keep the technology companies like Ideas in business for quite some time.
Nice plug.
Funny, I like that. There'll be another gift coming your way from no, it's interesting. I mean, the comment on that BBC article, it seems to have locked on the output screen. I'm just trying to make sure I don't lock you all to watching that. I should stop presenting. But the comment on the BBC site there was talking about they streamed Dynasties, and they did about 8 million streams, and 18% of those were in Ultra HD. Now, I'm trying to work out what player detect technology was making the consumer players detect that they were on a UHD compatible screen display that actually then went, oh, right, okay, this user can actually get the benefit of Ultra HD, so therefore we'll switch them over to it. Because at the moment, as far as I know, all the players can detect bit rates, but they can't sit there and detect that there's a request for an Ultra HD stream. Maybe I'm wrong on that one, and I might need to go and do a little bit more research. But I think they basically put out their highest bit rate in Ultra HD, and then anyone who's got enough bandwidth to get the highest bit rate is going to get the Ultra HD stream, whether or not they actually can decode Ultra HD on their device. So I think that's a bit of false data from my point of view, being a pedant.
Yep, valid point.
Right. Okay, let's move on. Simon, Tim, you take over the topics. Go on.
Let's get back actually, because I'm on my phone, I can't see the screen. But what was the topic that I said I wanted to cover?
Okay, we had what were we going for? Tim wanted to talk about the Apple TV Plus.
Oh yeah. So, and Mark, have you talked yet? Since I was gone for a couple of minutes, have you talked yet about the sort of Disney model on streaming?
No, not yet. I mean, I think now we kind of get into the general SVOD saturation portion of the show here. But let's kick it off with the Apple TV Plus thing, and we'll segue into other stuff. But that's kind of driving everything at this point.
Exactly. I think it was sort of intriguing watching the Apple TV Plus announcement. And for those who may not know what it is, Apple has a streaming service that they're going to be launching sometime in the not too distant future that has original content, but it also, as part of an update to their application, the Apple TV application, they're going to carry the ability to find Hulu content and Amazon Prime content, along with content from, of course, the iTunes Store, etc. What wasn't there was Netflix, and also what wasn't there was Disney. And part of what I'm wondering about this model is whether or not, given the relationship between Pixar and Disney and Apple and Disney, whether there will be some Disney content on Apple TV Plus, or whether, as Mark was suggesting before we got on the air here about half an hour ago, that not only will Disney content or Marvel content not be available on Netflix, it may not be available on other service providers. Mark, you mentioned that that there's original content on Netflix that is Marvel based that's going to be pulled.
Yeah, and I would think if that were going to happen elsewhere, it would have been announced by now. Like there would have been a sort of monolithic announcement that all content that's not on either ABC or Disney Plus is going to get pulled off of those other services. They've announced that all of the original Marvel Universe shows on Netflix, and there are 6 of those, are gone as of this next season. So there's two seasons currently in production of, I think it's, what is it, Luke Cage and Punisher. And then other than that, they're done in production, and then they're pulling the content, or they're pulling the live production at that point. The content, strangely enough, and here's another weird aspect of this, will continue to live on Netflix. So this whole concept of there not being any Disney content, elsewhere other than Disney Plus is kind of screws that whole concept, because there will be content. It'll just be old content. So all the stuff that Netflix is paid to produce will continue to live on Netflix. And at this point, there has been no announcement regarding the Hulu shows. So there's 2 Marvel Universe shows on Hulu, and then Fox has The Gifted. So there are kind of Marvel properties strewn across the landscape, and we don't know what's going to happen with those. But they have announced all of the new shows that are in production specifically for Disney Plus, and so those will be exciting. But it doesn't seem like the existing shows that they've produced. I can't remember what I saw. It was like 2,000 minutes of content, or 3,000 minutes of content, or something like that, for all of these Marvel shows on Netflix. And they're very, very high budget, very well produced shows. I don't think any of that content is going to make its way over to Disney Plus. It will continue to live on Netflix until it just fizzles out. So yeah.
And what's interesting about that, and I want to come back to something Olga had said just as I dropped off inadvertently, when you were talking, Olga, about you live in the US, you have content you watch on Netflix or Amazon Prime in the US, then you travel abroad and it's not available. I found out a couple of years ago, and this may be sort of to what Mark's saying about content staying on Netflix, that Netflix paid for production. What I found out was I was in Turkey, and Orange is the New Black was playing as an episodic in Turkey on traditional television. So once a week there was a new episode. And as I delved into it deeper, it turned out that basically the way that the production contract was written was that in the US at that point, in the UK, Orange is the New Black could be shown on Netflix, but if you were elsewhere, then there were actual production agreements or distribution agreements in place for that content. So to a certain extent, that was one reason why you couldn't watch certain shows overseas. Now, like I said, that's been addressed at some level with Amazon Originals. And I wonder, Mark, if there's going to be a model too that says, if Disney wants you to be able to watch all the Marvel content in one place, whether they're going to then have to turn around and license from either Netflix or the production company that did that for Netflix. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a possibility, and that I was just thinking the same thing. At some point further down the line, when Disney Plus is an established SVOD service and they've got millions of confirmed paid subscribers, they will probably buy their content back from Netflix at that point. And at that point, who knows what will happen with the Hulu shows and the Fox show and all the other stuff. Be interesting to see what happens with the content that they have on ABC. All of the Disney branded content, the Marvel branded content. A lot of that shows up on ABC because it's wholly owned by Disney, but it'd be interesting to see if that, if they go with more of the CBS All Access SVOD model, where the really good stuff only appears on Disney Plus and ABC gets the chaff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be interesting to see if one of these operators actually sorts out their age and access limits, because I was thinking the other day, Disney in particular have a sort of appeal. You kind of instinctively associate them with being kids programming. They're not necessarily kids programming, but you kind of instinctively think of them as being kids programming. And what I've noticed with our Netflix account is we've got a couple of profiles for myself and my other half, and then we've got 2 profiles for our kids, which is great for recommendations. But if I walk out of the room and leave my older kid with the TV for 20 minutes, then she's automatically jumped into my profile with no age limit, no PIN number, no control, and she's automatically jumped over her age limit up into the 12s or into the 15s or whatever the cert that has the content that she really wants to watch it on is, and so on. And it's going to be interesting. I don't think I haven't seen anyone really get that right yet. And I think, YouTube's a mess. You can't really leave your kids, well, certainly young kids, you can't leave them unattended with YouTube. There are sort of, I can't remember the name of it, but there are obviously, there's a splinter Google search engine, which I think is much more locked down and optimized for kids. But with Disney coming into the picture, I wouldn't be surprised. Well, I'd be surprised if they didn't sort that age restriction out, so that you put the user's age in, you have some way of identifying who you are. Maybe you play a little 2-second game or something just to unlock your account, which proves you're the profile user. It knows your birthday and it goes, yeah, okay, you can watch the stuff that's suitable for an 8-year-old, but you can't watch the stuff that's suitable for a 10-year-old. Because I haven't yet seen a streaming service that gets that right and means I can leave my kids with my Apple TV, with my Roku, with my streaming TV service, and know that they're not going to just detach from the walled garden that I want to leave them in myself.
Well, yeah, it's funny that you say that, Dom, because both on YouTube and also on Apple TV, Michelle and I were talking a couple of weeks ago. She actually pulled YouTube off the girls' Amazon Fire tablets because of the fact that she couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't get some of that strange stuff. And then when we went to set an Apple TV up, we, for instance, put Netflix is absolutely a problem. You can't essentially pin it out. But with PBS, the public broadcaster here in the States, what they've done is they've got PBS and PBS Kids. And if you have the PBS Kids app, it is only kids content. So Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that kind of thing. That may almost be what has to happen, is it's different apps for different age groups, at least in terms of being able to be certain that you lock it down. The problem is, as we all know, is you as an adult aren't going to hide the Netflix app from your kids and then go find it on your Apple TV, because that's a 2-minute process. You're absolutely right. That's a huge issue, and it's an issue that has to be addressed. We haven't do it
of all brands. I think the Disney brand in particular needs to get that right. That's the one.
I would agree.
Well, I think they need to get it right, but you also have to bear in mind that with the exception of some of the Marvel content, there isn't a whole lot of content in the Disney, ecosystem that is inappropriate for kids. I mean, virtually all of the Disney branded content, all of the Muppets branded content, all of the Lucasfilm branded content, that's all very appropriate for kids. It's only some of the more, violent, Avengers, Marvel Universe hero stuff that might be inappropriate for, under 12 or something like that. But there's just not a whole lot of content that's going to show up on Disney Plus that they're going to have to restrict at all.
But it brings up an interesting point, Mark, in the fact that they could either go multiple apps, one for Marvel, one for Disney, etc., and that would help solve part of that. Or they are going to have to figure out the age appropriate, because if they lump it all into a single streaming service, there are parents who aren't going to want their kids to watch Avengers, especially if they're 6, 7, 8-year-old, something like that.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of, Disney's always been very, very good at getting that right. They've been getting that right for 20 years on their web properties. So I think that'll certainly extend to Disney Plus, and it'll be tied into the age restrictions that are already in place on their online properties. So yeah.
So let's switch gears here to Simon, Enterprise Video. One of the things you had mentioned before the top of the hour, before we went live, was I'm not going to call it artificial intelligence. I'm going to call it machine learning, just because that tends to be what it is. But talk about how machine learning is playing out in some of the different things that you were talking about with personalization, sentiment analysis, etc.
Yeah, I like the fact you deliberately avoided AI. It's an abused, term. The same as the cloud 20 years ago is like a very misused.
Or OTT today.
Or ATT today, exactly. So we are seeing a more use of using consumption of content to drive analytics. So an example is what happens when financial broadcast, for example. You've got voice to text, speech to text services these days, and machine learning that can look at intonation of words, the construct of sentences, and predict sentiment that's going to be derived from those. And obviously, the more data you have, the more reliable that thing comes. And we're seeing that in the market. We're not deploying it ourselves yet, but we are interested in doing that. And then personalized video is kind of a bit of a buzz in the marketing space at the moment. Less really machine learning, because at the end of the day, it relies upon data that is inputted or upon geographic data that's available to them in order to personalize that video. I mean, the sort of classic example is, U2's a U2 concert is global, and it alerts the viewer of the local date and time of that concert, because it's geo recognizing where they're viewing the content from in its very simplistic form. But there's applications in the marketing environment where you're personalizing it to the person. So dynamic graphic overlays that say, hey Bob, we know that your bank account has X many dollars in it, and we would like to recommend to you a savings plan. I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the marketing B2C spaces and the B2B spaces.
And sorry, go ahead, Don.
I was going to say this is an interesting sort of convergence of both what you were just saying there about hyper-personalization and the previous conversation about age verification. Andrew P. in the chat room has just commented that we should do age recognition at the edge using cameras and AI in real time, so the TV can spy on you, know that it's a kid watching, and then turn the TV off if you're underage. Perfect.
Except the fact that everybody has Donald Trump masks apparently in the United States, so all the kid would have to do is put that on, and then it would say, "Oh, you're old enough to do this,"
or not old enough to do anything at all, possibly.
All right. Anyway, sorry. Politics aside, the other thing you mentioned, Simon, was something that we would consider sort of low tech these days, but video mail, so to speak. Talk a little bit about that.
I know. So personalizing, sort of trying to differentiate your message from the clutter that's in everybody's inboxes. And there are companies out there that are promoting video mail. We're actually introducing it into our product. Click here to output this archive of the webcast to an email so that you can then distribute it. You still, it's a thumbnail that you link out to, but it's designed to sort of take people away from the written word to the video word, and it's getting some adoption in the certainly in the the business community, marketing community. But it's ultimately it's low tech, but low tech reinvented for the modern age.
And is the idea here just to essentially cloud store all that video, and then the links themselves remain dynamic, or is the content itself actually being attached to the
content? It's still launching a browser experience from the email. So when I said low tech, that is low tech, but combined with personalization. 30,000 distributed lists. Each video is dynamic so that you can address your specific recipient with their name. Hi, Bob. I noticed that you were, shopping in the Amazon store yesterday, and you walked past the gaming aisle but didn't buy anything. That sort of thing.
All righty, it's already scary enough to see those ads pop
up in your
browser, but to have somebody in video say to you, Simon, you didn't buy that. Why didn't you buy that?
I was taking it to its extreme in its practical use application today. It's more about lower thirds and content that's specifically geared for that consumption and graphical overlays. Yeah,
got it. And talk about monetization in the B2B world, because we tend to focus, or we've tended to focus on high value content, things like Marvel, things like Disney, things like Netflix, but you're really in a space that seems still to be quite a bit untapped, and at some level had been quite behind up until just recently because enterprise relied on Windows media servers, and when that stuff finally, sort of disappeared from or was end of life by Microsoft, it seemed like we started to gather steam in terms of better technology in enterprise. But talk about monetization.
Well, it's driven. It's supply. It's the classic supply and demand. CEOs are wanting to, get in front of their employee audiences to drive employee engagement. Video is without doubt the best way of achieving that connection with a broad workforce at the same time. And more and more CEOs are jumping on that bandwagon in order to do it. We actually produce internally a weekly video every single week that has different key points that gets very high viewership, but live on demand. So yes, networks had advanced. There's a proliferation of enterprise content distribution networks out there. We integrate with them all because they all have different applicable use cases for different networks, whether it be peer-to-peer or caching or multicast. More and more executive teams are wanting to communicate more, which is driving the IT adoption within these organizations, and more ad hoc, right? So they're becoming, I think, the whole ubiquitousness of streaming in the marketplace is actually driving that adoption in the corporate environment as well, because everyone's so used to picking up their iPhone, creating video content, and distributing it in social media. It's a natural progression. And in fact, corporations themselves are adopting social media as a mechanism. We have customers wanting to use Facebook pages to communicate with their workflow, to communicate with their workforce, and asking us to facilitate the capability to get content into into Facebook securely and reliably in the first place. And yeah, so we're seeing that proliferation, which is great because it's driving demand, and it's driving adoption of our technologies.
Very cool. Hey, Dom, I think we're coming up to about 8 minutes to the hour, so trends at this point.
Yeah, let's press the button just to mark it out when we scan back. Oh, we got the funky music. Even Mark started dancing there. Funky stuff. So of course, Mark, you'll be going to NAB because it's on your doorstep, I take it. But are you all going to NAB this year?
That seems to be the plan.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be there for the first time. I've been to IBC many times in the past, and I'm going to be there. It's indicative of the corporate space embracing video and the broadcast technologies. So I'm only going to be there for the day.
I'm coming to town. This is scary stuff. Okay, cool. And Tim, you're going down, are you?
Yeah, definitely. I'll be there. In fact, I mentioned at the top of the hour, we did a session at Streaming Media, a webinar about what to look at. And one of the things that I think is really intriguing, Dom, and I'm going to say a word that you know a whole lot more about than I do, but I've been seeing smaller and smaller drones that are gimballess. And traditionally in the broadcast world, everybody wanted an octocopter or something with 8 rotors to help stabilize a gimbal and put a heavy camera on. What I've started to see is smaller drones that actually are using image stabilization, somewhat akin to what Adobe did a couple of years ago, where you could lock onto a particular object and then stabilize without a gimbal. I think the broadcast world is, they're not as sexy anymore, drones, but I think they're going to become more ubiquitous given the fact that we can get higher and higher image quality out of smaller and smaller drones. So for me, that's one trend. And then in-car entertainment is another trend that I really want to pay attention to, because when we're talking about distraction, when we're talking about people moving from device to device, if you think about the age verification issue you were talking about before, quadruple the potential there when somebody is a driver but says they're a passenger and wants to consume content. How do we make sure that in-car entertainment experience is good, really good, but also safe for not just the people in the car, but in the cars around?
Yeah, interesting. Mark, what are you expecting to see? Actually, let's come to you last because you'll have all sorts of good fun tips about where to go as well, because you know that place like your backyard. So, Olga, what are you expecting to see?
Well, I'm hoping to see outside of our meeting room. The downside to having a meeting room or a booth at a IBC or at NAB or any conference for that matter is being attached to your booth or meeting room. So I'm hoping to get out. I mean, we will be roaming around talking to all the people who are working with AWS on the Speak integration and learning more about that, and looking forward to learning more about CMAF and seeing where all of that goes as far as we're concerned.
Perfect. Simon, what's your okay, so it's your first NAB. Are you looking forward to anything particular?
Actually, the reason I'm going is we'll be announcing a partnership where we've got a drop down in a encoding piece of software. So where you can select Facebook or live stream as an output, you will be able to select West as an output, which is quite cool. Yeah.
Very cool. Go on then, Mark. Let's let you off for these.
Well,
what are you doing? What should people be doing?
Well, first of all, I'm curious what piece of software Simon's talking about. Can you talk about it yet? Or...
Yeah, well, it's going to be released. We'll give you a breaking news. It's Telestream Wirecast.
Ah, fantastic.
So, yeah.
Congratulations. It's excellent.
Thank you, yeah.
So yeah, NAB. I mean, we're always excited about new production kit and software and that sort of thing. So we'll be checking out a lot of that stuff. We're in the middle of productizing a new service that I'll probably talk about on our next installment. But we'll be talking to a lot of VM VPDs about providing services for that market. I'm personally very interested to find out what the ramifications are, since we use a ton of new tech technology and NDI technology, as to what the VizRT acquisition means for them. What has been a kind of a pleasantly mom and pop sort of operation there in Texas, and you know what that will mean for the future of that corporate culture more than anything over there. So I think it means good things from a funding perspective and from an R&D perspective, especially since their CTO will be able to focus primarily on R&D at this point and not really running the company like he has been. But it'll be interesting to see, you know, how it changes in terms of their dealings with their customers, et cetera. So I'll spend a lot of time at the new tech booth.
I have to be honest, I went online and had a good look to find out what VizRT was all about, and I still can't work it out. Storyboard telling, media munging, I really don't know what they do.
VizRT is primarily a graphics company. They're primarily a mid-level broadcast graphics company, and they got in cahoots with New Tech a couple years ago to create this appliance that they built into their product line that enables a much more robust graphics tool set for the TriCaster VMC product line. And I guess that led to some discussions, which led to an acquisition. So it was kind of a surprise to everyone, including New Tech diehards and resellers and that sort of thing. It all came as quite a surprise. Tim, were you saying something?
Yeah, I was going to say the corporate culture thing is actually a really good point, Mark, because one of the things that of course, New Tech started on was working with indies, sort of the replacement for high-end broadcast. They moved high-end broadcast, got complaints from the diehards, came out with the TriCaster Mini to sort of answer, you know, the lower end of the market. And whether or not that stuff's going to disappear, I think, is on a lot of people's minds, because they've very traditionally been able to balance between high-end and independent, you know, wedding videographers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't see it going away. I'm very optimistic at this point. I have high hopes for them being able to maintain their broad product line and to maybe improve some of the areas in which they've been lacking, which is, you know, technical support and things like that. Being able to become a true broadcast company for those of us who use their stuff in mission critical, you know, true broadcast formats. That's been a little bit too mom and pop. So hopefully they'll be able to kind of, you know, leverage some of that funding into better support.
Well, and as you say, Andrew now gets to go back to being CTO as opposed to being CTO and president, essentially, which is a really good thing because he's brilliant in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Well, chaps, you guys have lots of fun at NAB. I won't be trekking over, but I'll be seeing you just after the next SMAF at Streaming Media East. So enjoy wearing your shoes thin, pacing the 21, 15, I can't remember how many halls of NAB it is. And Tim, I hope you find a charger for your laptop so we can get your camera in next time. I don't know what's been going on with the camera the last few
Although
weeks.
I will say I did enjoy the handheld upper angle. It was very max headroom. I don't know if I'm dating myself.
Kind of like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it.
Well,
we can see it all, but it's not your camera has it since you moved to mobile. Unfortunately, we've only had your audio going out on the YouTube stream. Whoever you've been talking to has been locked on camera.
I will say, Dom, also the your present actually will be arriving between now and the next event. So during the next one, we'll have to have you unveil that.
Okay, sounds good. Excellent. Just as a heads up for the next event, which will be on May the 2nd, I've now decided to add 20 in front of each of the years because everyone was getting confused by May 19 at June 19 and so on. So I've now added that. And but the next SMAF is on Thursday, May the 2nd with Draw Grill from B. Well, I know we're not going to mention companies, but Draw Grill and Flip Talo. So do check the site, lock up for an email reminder. I'd like to say a quick thank you to Michael and to Jim and Andrew, who've been chatting away merrily in the chat room. That's always good to have you guys in there. And Michael says, Mark, you have a Rolling Stones poster. Let's hope Mick comes through the surgery okay. So there you go.
Absolutely.
And Olga, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you get outside your meeting space and enjoy some of the delights of Vegas. I'm sure Mark will pop by and bring you some sushi if you send him a message.
Oh, I will absolutely take sushi any day of the week.
Just text me.
Perfect. And Simon, I'm sure you'll be able to tag along for some sushi as well. Thank you both. Great stuff. Tim, go find yourself a charger. Mark, and in his in absentia, thanks from Eric as well. We've been SMAF. We'll see you next month. Thanks, guys.
Bye.